shadow.
Like, subscribe, and step softly. Tonight, we part a curtain you've crossed 1,000 times without seeing the stage behind it. The Dreamlands, Lovecraft's other continent, glow like a lantern in the fog, inviting, antique, beautiful. And yet the lantern burns with a light that notices you back. You will not leave as you arrived. Here is the promise and the price. We will trace the map of a world that wears a mask of wonder. The opal domes of Celiphaes, the quiet law of Ulthar, the violet skies above Seranian, and reveal the darker geometry that holds those skies aloft. We will handle signs that feel like keys and gates. We will touch the veil and the void, and we will let the idea act on you as ideas in the mythos always do. In the first 45 seconds, a confession. Knowledge in this terrain is not observation. It is participation. The stage is set. The audience is implicated. The curtain never fully drops. The Dreamlands emerge not as escape from reality, but as revelation of what reality conceals. That consciousness itself is fluid, identity is performance, and the boundaries we depend upon are as fragile as morning mist. Unlike the cosmic entities that threaten from distant stars, the Dreamlands emerge from within, through the familiar portal of sleep that we trust with our most vulnerable hours. This is intimate horror, where the familiar architecture of dreams becomes a labyrinth of existential terror. Listen, soft fur treads across floorboards. A cat's eye holds a star. Fog presses the window. Water licks the key of Dilith Lean. A black galley slides without oars. These anchors will ground you as we move from origin to lineage, from mechanism to consequence. We will keep a hand on the rail. What makes this realm of sleep more frightening than the waking world? The waking world has teeth, hunger, time, death, but it also has limits that cradle. The Dreamlands remove the fence around desire. There is no morning bell that guarantees a ceasefire. There is only the next step down the 700 steps of deeper slumber, the next sign, the next door. And doors once opened practice a kind of hospitality that consumes the guest. The horror is not that the Dreamlands are chaotic while the waking world is ordered. The horror is that both are equally unstable, but only in dreams do we admit it. The waking world's apparent solidity is a collective performance, a shared hallucination of stability. The Dreamlands strip away this performance, revealing the fluid, mutable nature of all experience. Every night you surrender consciousness with the faith of a sleepwalker approaching a precipice. You close your eyes, trusting that the self you think you are will reassemble come morning, that the world will maintain its shape while you're away. But in the Dreamlands, the sentries abandon their posts. Identity becomes mercury. Time moves through emotional rather than mechanical logic. Space responds to attention rather than geometrics. Law. You do not dream the place dreams you. This is the agency flip that transforms observer into observed, audience into actor. The grotesque figures populating dream narratives are not invaders from outside, but ambassadors from within, representatives of psychological processes that rational awareness keeps hidden. The cat with too many eyes is your perception multiplied beyond comfortable limits. The priest with the yellow mask is your capacity for self-deception made visible. The terror emerges from recognition rather than encounter. If consciousness naturally operates according to dream logic, when social constraints dissolve, then rational, unified, linear awareness reveals itself as artificial construction rather than natural state. The solid world of objects and others of cause and effect becomes suspect. You begin noticing cracks in consensus reality, moments when the performance falters and deeper fluidity shows through. The dreamlands frighten because they are honest. They acknowledge their constructed nature, their dependence on consciousness, their fundamental unreality. The waking world maintains opposite pretense, that it exists independently of consciousness, that its laws are absolute, its boundaries real. This pretense provides comfort at truth's expense. The dreamlands offer truth at comfort's cost. But truth seduces. Once you understand reality as construction, you notice the construction process everywhere. Categories organizing waking experience, self and other real and imaginary, possible and impossible, reveal themselves as conveniences rather than truths. Boundaries that seemed absolute become permeable. The impossible becomes merely improbable, then unlikely, then simply another option among many. The scent of incense drifts through stone corridors. Somewhere, pipes thread darkness with melodies in scales unknown to human music. On wet docks, tar smell mingles with salt. These sensory anchors embed themselves like splinters of another world, creating what we might call psychic real estate. Mental territories the dreamlands can inhabit. The hook is baited. We have named the stage and dimmed the lamps. Ahead waits an origin, how this theater of velvet and bone came to be, and then the genealogy of masks it has worn to reach us. You are in the circle now. You will want to see how it spreads. Before Celiphae floated on pearl-white clouds, before the cats of Ulthar made their silent law, the dreamlands existed as pressure in language, a Dunsanian perfume of moonlit keys, bronze gods, and impossible geographies. Lovecraft, a cartographer of voids, inhaled that perfume and distilled it into a map that pretends to kindness while serving deeper, more indifferent purposes. The transmission began with Lord Dunsany's jeweled dreamscapes, those measured cadences that spoke of Pagana and the gods thereof. But where Dunsany offered wonder tinged with melancholy, Lovecraft introduced the cosmic chill, the recognition that beauty itself might be a lure, wonder a trap, and the gods indifferent to the very worship they inspire. The lineage flows through specific texts. The white ship as initial vessel, Celiphae as the first true glimpse of the price, and the dream quest of unknown Kadath as the full cartographic revelation. This transmission operates not through rational argument, but through what we might call resonance recognition. When readers encounter Carter's journey through impossible architectures, something within their own unconscious architecture vibrates in response. The stories function as activation keys for psychological territories that were always present but never acknowledged. Reading about the dreamlands is like learning to see structures that consciousness naturally inhabits when freed from social constraint. The mechanism spreads through scholarly channels as well as imaginative ones. Academic discourse about the dreamlands provides intellectual justification for exploring irrational territories, making dream logic principles available to minds that might resist direct fictional transmission. The careful documentation of sources, influences, and textual variations becomes its own form of ritual, a secondary transmission that spreads the influence through rational channels, while the primary transmission works through deeper psychological currents. Consider how each medium transforms the cargo it carries. Weird Tales magazine, with its lurid covers and pulp sensibilities, embedded dream logic in popular consciousness. Later, Arkham House editions lent scholarly respectability to impossible architectures. Academic conferences became unwitting ceremonies where professors discussing fictional geography found their own thinking becoming more geographical, more fictional. Each translator who rendered Lovecraft's English into foreign tongues discovered that dream logic principles translated themselves, finding new expressions in languages that had never known Kadath's name. The texts themselves become contaminated objects carrying more than their apparent content. Libraries housing dream stories develop peculiar atmospheres. Readers report unusual dreams after encountering certain passages. The books seem to select their own audiences, finding their way to consciousness already primed for transformation. This is not supernatural, but psychological. Certain minds recognize kinship with ideas that match their hidden architecture. Listen for the props accumulating, masks carved from moonwood, signs scratched on black hulls, stairs wet with cavern water. The enchanted wood rustles with creatures whose teeth are too many for their mouths. These sensory anchors embed themselves in the reader's imagination, creating what we might call psychic real estate, mental territories that the Dreamlands can inhabit. The Internet accelerates transmission beyond anything Lovecraft could have imagined. Online communities devoted to dream exploration share techniques that mirror his fictional methods. Forums discussing lucid dreaming adopt Dreamlands terminology. Role-playing games allow participants to inhabit Carter's perspective directly, experiencing identity transformation through gameplay rather than reading. Each digital adaptation creates new vectors for the same essential recognition. What makes each iteration particularly potent is how it adapts to its host consciousness. The businessman reading Carter's adventures might recognize the futility of pursuing success that dissolves upon achievement. The artist might glimpse the terror of creative inspiration that demands abandoning rational control. The scholar might discover that understanding the Dreamlands requires participating in the very irrationality they attempt to analyze. The transmission is irreversible. Once you understand how dream logic operates, you begin to recognize its presence everywhere. The rational structures of waking consciousness reveal themselves as elaborate defenses against the natural fluidity of psychological experience. The Dreamlands becomes not an escape from reality, but a return to consciousness's natural state. The recognition operates like a cognitive virus, restructuring perception in ways that cannot be reversed. Once you notice that identity is performance, you cannot stop noticing the performance. Once you experience emotional causality in following dream narratives, mechanical causality seems crude by comparison. Once you inhabit multiple perspectives through reading, single-point consciousness feels artificially constrained. What makes this transmission particularly unsettling is its inevitability. The ideas spread not through force, but through recognition. Each consciousness that encounters the Dreamlands becomes a potential vector for their further propagation, carrying the recognition that the impossible is not only possible, but natural. The very ground of all experience, the scholarly apparatus surrounding dream logic creates its own transmission network. Footnotes become sigils. Bibliographies become incantations. The careful analysis of impossible architectures makes those architectures more architecturally impossible. Academic discourse provides rational justification for irrational exploration. creating intellectual permission for psychological territories that waking consciousness normally forbids. The fog thickens around consensus reality. Somewhere in the distance, pipes play melodies that reorganize neural architecture according to dream principles. The transmission continues through every word you read, every image you form, every moment of recognition that flickers through awareness, as familiar territories reveal themselves as foreign, and foreign territories feel like home. The black galley of transmission sails onward, and you discover you are not merely passenger, but part of the cargo, transformed by the journey itself. Your engagement with these ideas changes you in the process of engaging them. The boundary between studying the dreamlands and inhabiting them dissolves through the study itself, preparing consciousness for the deeper recognitions that await in the mechanics of dream logic itself. In the dreamlands, the most fundamental horror is not external threat, but internal transformation. The rational boundaries that structure waking consciousness between self and other thought and reality, possible and impossible, dissolve like salt in dark water. This dissolution is not pathology, but revelation of consciousness's true nature when freed from social necessity. The mechanism operates through what we might call perspective multiplication. In waking consciousness, you maintain the illusion of being a single, continuous self moving through linear time. In the dreamlands, this illusion naturally dissolves. You become multiple people simultaneously, experience events from various perspectives, inhabit different temporal states concurrently. Randolph Carter serves as our primary guide through this transformation, experiencing being simultaneously himself and his ancestors, accessing memories that are both personal and inherited. The horror emerges from recognizing that the unified self you experience in waking life is a performance, a collaborative fiction, maintained through social reinforcement. The dreamlands strip away this performance, revealing the multiplicity that lies beneath. You discover that you are not one person, but many, not a continuous identity, but a series of temporary configurations, not a solid self, but a fluid process of becoming. Consider the recurring motif of ancestral memory that threads through Carter's experiences. He accesses not only his own memories, but those of his lineage, experiencing past events as if they were his own, while simultaneously maintaining awareness of his present identity. When Carter finds himself simultaneously inhabiting his modern perspective and that of his Puritan ancestors, the experience carries no sense of confusion or contradiction. Instead, it feels like the natural expansion of awareness beyond artificial temporal boundaries. The memories are not his, yet they are entirely his, a paradox that rational consciousness cannot resolve, but dream consciousness accepts without question. This suggests that individual consciousness is not isolated, but participates in larger streams of collective memory and experience. The cat brushes your ankle, and for an instant, you are cat. A ribbon of night with silent paws, pupils like coins minted in starlight. Then you are watcher, then you are watched. At the key of Dilith Leon, tar and brine rasp the air, and you recall voyages you never took, storms you somehow survived, bargains you almost made with black hulls that cast no reflection. The dissolution occurs through specific mechanisms that the dream narratives carefully document. Landscape transformation triggers identity shifts. As the dreamer moves through different regions of the dreamlands, different aspects of selfhood become prominent. The familiar cobblestones of a childhood street might warp into the polished obsidian of an alien city, and with that shift, the self that walked the street is replaced by a self that knows the star roads. Each geographical transition corresponds to a psychological transition in the dreamer, with consciousness and environment existing in continuous mutual construction. Temporal displacement creates multiple simultaneous identities. You might be a child playing in a sun-dappled field while simultaneously being an elder contemplating the vastness of the cosmos, both realities equally immediate. Perspective shifts allow the dreamer to experience being both subject and object, observer and observed, dreamer and dreamed. You are the wind, and you are the leaf it stirs. The role inhabits you. The idea acts on you. The mask remembers a face you have not yet grown. What makes this particularly unsettling is that the multiplicity feels more natural than unity. When Carter experiences being his ancestor while remaining his 20th century self, the experience carries a sense of rightness that unified identity lacks. This suggests that consciousness naturally tends toward multiplicity, and that the unified self is an artificial constraint imposed by social necessity. The waking world demands a single, coherent narrative, a story you tell yourself and others to maintain social order. The Dreamlands reveal this narrative as a convenient fiction. The sensory anchors here become particularly important. The smell of incense in ancient chambers, the texture of stone worn smooth by countless hands, the sound of footsteps that might be your own or might belong to someone who walked these paths centuries ago. Listen to how the footsteps echo through corridors that exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously. The sound belongs to Carter's contemporary feet, yet it also belongs to his ancestors' boots, and to the countless others who have walked these paths across centuries that collapse into single moments of awareness. The scent of ancient incense carries similar temporal multiplicity. It is the frankincense of Christian ritual, the exotic perfumes of pagan ceremony, the smoke of sacrificial fires that burned before history began recording such things. Each inhalation brings multiple temporal perspectives into simultaneous presence, creating what we might call layered awareness, consciousness operating on multiple temporal frequencies concurrently. You might touch a mask carved from moonwood and feel the echoes of every face it has ever adorned, each identity whispering through your fingertips. These details ground the abstract concept of identity dissolution in immediate physical experience. Even the fog remembers you, folding around a shape that has worn many names and will wear more. The candles gutter in an airless chapel, and you smell beeswax over old stone. A page turns, though your hand is still. Somewhere, stairs drip, counting without numbers. The dissolution is irreversible. Once you understand that identity is performance rather than essence, the waking world's insistence on consistent selfhood becomes suspect. Every moment of unified identity carries the whisper of multiplicity beneath it. Every assertion of I am becomes qualified by the recognition that you are also many other things simultaneously. The curtain, once parted, cannot truly be redrawn. This recognition transforms ordinary social interaction into theater appreciation. You begin noticing the effort required to maintain consistent personality performance, the strain of pretending to be the same person across different contexts, the artificial nature of biographical narrative that attempts to create coherent identity from disparate experiences. The social world reveals itself as elaborate collaborative fiction, with each participant agreeing to maintain the illusion of unified selfhood in exchange for others maintaining the same comfortable deception. The transformation extends beyond personal identity into the nature of experience itself. If the self is multiple and fluid, then the objects of experience must be equally multiple and fluid. The solid world of things and others begins to shimmer with the same instability that dream consciousness reveals in personal identity. The boundary between observer and observed becomes permeable, allowing consciousness to inhabit multiple perspectives simultaneously. In this saturated atmosphere, the difference between thinking and happening thins. A thought arrives in the shape of a door, and the corridor obediently appears. A remembered grief settles like snow, and the plateau of Leng opens beneath your feet. The dreamlands are not content to be imagined. They imagine you back, arranging the angles of your attention until they meet at new geometries you mistake for fate. This prepares us for the deeper recognition that consciousness and its objects exist in relationships of mutual construction rather than subject-object separation, a truth that the dreamlands makes viscerally apparent. The fog thickens around the edges of rational certainty. Somewhere in the distance, pipes play melodies that reorganize the very foundations of selfhood, preparing consciousness for the recognition that the mechanics of dream logic operate not only in sleep, but in every moment of awareness, hidden beneath the performance of rational consistency. The dreamlands operate according to principles that the waking mind categorizes as impossible. Yet these principles feel more natural than the rigid causalities that govern conscious experience. This paradox reveals something profound about the nature of logic itself. That rational thought is actually a specialized subset of consciousness's broader operational principles, useful for social coordination, but inadequate for understanding the deeper structures of experience. Dream logic operates through what we might call emotional causality, rather than mechanical sequence. In the dreamlands, events occur not because they follow from previous events in linear fashion, but because they carry emotional or symbolic necessity. When Carter finds himself simultaneously in his childhood home and an alien city, the juxtaposition occurs not through spatial transportation, but through psychological resonance. The two locations exist in the same space because they occupy the same emotional territory, both representing the familiar made strange, the safe made uncertain. Consider how this emotional causality manifests with ruthless efficiency. A door opens not because someone turned a handle, but because the dreamer's curiosity reached sufficient intensity to require revelation. A staircase descends not because architecture demands it, but because the psychological situation calls for deeper exploration. The black galley arrives at the quay, not because wind filled its sails, but because the dreamer's readiness to depart has achieved the proper emotional weight. In waking consciousness, you might spend years developing courage to confront difficult truths. In dream consciousness, that truth manifests immediately as a figure wearing your face, but speaking in your Father's voice. The principle of symbolic condensation allows single images to carry multiple meanings simultaneously. In the dreamlands, a door is never merely a door, but also a threshold, a choice, a transformation, a revelation. This multiplicity of meaning is not confusion, but precision. The dream symbol captures relationships that linear language cannot express. The waking world's insistence on single, fixed meanings impoverishes rather than clarifies communication. Watch how a simple mask operates according to this principle. It is simultaneously concealment and revelation, protection and vulnerability, identity and anonymity, past and present, self and other. Each meaning exists fully and completely, not as metaphorical extension, but as literal truth. The mask is all these things at once because consciousness naturally operates through such condensations when freed from the artificial constraint of single meaning assignment. This is not primitive thinking, but sophisticated information processing, one image shouldering many truths without strain, the way water reflects multiple skies. Temporal logic in the Dreamlands operates through psychological rather than chronological sequence. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously, accessible through shifts in attention rather than movement through time. Carter experiences his ancestors' memories not by traveling to the past, but by adjusting his perspective to include ancestral consciousness within his present awareness. The memory is not recalled, but inhabited, not remembered, but re-experienced with full immediacy. This temporal fluidity reflects consciousness's natural relationship to time. The linear sequence of clock time serves practical coordination, but obscures the psychological reality that all temporal experience occurs in the eternal now of awareness. You might find yourself walking through a bustling market and simultaneously realize that the market vanished centuries ago, yet both exist now. The sense of déjà vu that occasionally pricks wakened consciousness is a faint echo of this more fundamental temporal fluidity. Time is not a river, but a vast, still ocean where all moments coexist, waiting for consciousness to cast its net. The principle of identity transformation allows consciousness to inhabit multiple forms without losing continuity. The dreamer becomes cat, becomes ancient priest, becomes cosmic entity, while remaining recognizably themselves. This is not shape-shifting in the fantasy sense, but recognition that consciousness is not bound by the physical forms it temporarily inhabits. These transformations occur through perspective adoption rather than identity replacement. You do not cease being yourself when you become the cat. You discover that being cat was always one of your possibilities. Spatial logic reflects psychological rather than geometric relationships. Distances correspond to emotional proximity rather than physical measurement. The journey to unknown Kadath is infinitely long, not because of spatial separation, but because it represents the unreachable center of consciousness. The dreamer can travel vast distances instantly when psychological conditions align, or remain trapped in single locations when internal conflicts prevent movement. Places that are emotionally similar exist in proximity regardless of their apparent geographical relationship. The childhood bedroom and the alien temple occupy the same location because they represent the same psychological territory, the space of wonder tinged with terror. What makes these impossible logics particularly unsettling is their efficiency. Dream logic accomplishes in single images what rational discourse requires paragraphs to explain: the condensation of multiple meanings into symbolic form, the simultaneous existence of contradictory states, the fluid transformation of identity and space. These are not primitive thinking, but sophisticated information processing that the waking mind cannot match. An emblem performs what an essay describes. A sigil is a theorem compressed to a touch. The horror emerges from recognizing that rational logic is not more accurate than dream logic, but merely more limited. The waking world's insistence on single meanings, linear causality, and fixed identity serves social coordination, but obscures the richer relationships that dream logic reveals. Rational thought is like a flashlight in a vast cavern. It illuminates small areas clearly while leaving the greater darkness unexamined. This does not make the waking mind wrong, only provincial. Listen, the sound of water that might be applause, the rustle of leaves that spell messages in languages older than speech, the footsteps of someone who might be you walking paths you've never seen. These anchors remind us that dream logic is not abstract but intensely sensory, immediately present, undeniably real. The fog carries scents that trigger memories you have not yet made. The stone beneath your hand holds warmth from fires that burned in centuries you have not visited. The darkness whispers in voices that speak your name in languages you do not recognize but somehow understand. Each sensory detail operates according to dream logic principles, carrying multiple simultaneous meanings, existing in emotional rather than mechanical relationship to other elements, transforming according to the dreamer's psychological state rather than physical law. The accumulated effect is not chaos but a different kind of order, one that consciousness recognizes as more natural than the artificial constraints of rational consistency. Consider the economy of contradiction. In daylight, we exile opposites to separate corners, adjudicate, choose. In dreams, contradiction is collaboration. You can grieve and rejoice with the same breath, and neither cancels the other. The river is both road and boundary. The mask hides and reveals. The darkness comforts and devours. Such paradox pairs are not clever paradoxes, but working tools, allowing consciousness to handle complexities that would otherwise stall cognition. This recognition prepares consciousness for the deeper revelation that awaits, that the entities governing these dream territories are not merely characters, but principles made manifest, archetypal forces that embody these logical principles informs consciousness can encounter directly, making abstract mechanics viscerally immediate through divine encounter. Within the Dreamland's shifting geography dwells a pantheon that defies conventional understanding of divine hierarchy, because these presences are less beings than behaviors, less sovereigns than systems, less faces than forces that consciousness performs when it crosses from curtain to cavern. They are principles in masks, the key and the gate, the veil and the void, speaking in symbols rather than laws, while the audience realizes the stage is their own skull. The great ones of the Dreamlands, those beings who once walked among dreamers before withdrawing to unknown Kadath, embody consciousness's capacity for transcendence and meaning-making. They represent the part of the psyche that creates coherent narratives from chaotic experience, that finds pattern in randomness, that generates purpose from purposelessness. Their withdrawal from direct contact mirrors the modern condition where meaning must be actively constructed rather than passively received. These entities once provided ready-made significance, divine order that consciousness could inhabit without question. Their retreat to the high black curtain of the mountain is mercy disguised as absence, for unmediated divine encounter would shatter the fragile theater of the waking ego, drowning it in floods of meaning too vast to contain. But above the great ones lurk the other gods, led by Azathoth, whose mindless piping maintains the fabric of reality through pure, meaningless creativity. This is Lovecraft's most profound insight into consciousness, that beneath all meaning-making, all narrative construction, all purposeful activity, lies a process of pure becoming that operates without intention, without awareness, without direction. The horror is not that this process is evil, but that it is indifferent. Azathoth represents the creative principle stripped of all anthropomorphic qualities. Pure generative force, without purpose, awareness, or concern for its creations. His is the engine that cares for nothing, and therefore permits everything, a sovereign without sovereignty, creativity without creator. To feel him is to hear flutes in darkness and know the song will not resolve. To know him is to understand that purpose is a costume stitched after the performance. Between the withdrawn makers of meaning and the mindless maker of motion slithers a messenger, Nyarlathotep, thousand-masked stage manager and saboteur, the prompter who whispers both the line and its undoing. He delights in agency flip, appearing as the answer while he widens the question, granting keys that are also locks, revealing truths that bloom into labyrinths. In dreams, he wears forms proportioned to our evasions. A lean scholar with star-black eyes proffering scrolls that edit themselves, a pharaoh whose shadow writes new shadows on temple walls, a city voice in fog promising safe harbors as black galleys glide without oars. He is not evil. He is the property of consciousness that performs clarity while installing complication, the principle that lets you watch yourself watch, that multiplies mirrors until the backstage is infinite. Not all members of this pantheon tower like mountains or radiate like suns. Some pad softly along rooftops under patient moons, and their law is older than any written code. The cats of Ulthar embody inevitability, justice not as verdict, but as physics, a sloping of the world toward consequence. These silent furred magistrates move with purpose that transcends individual will, their green eyes holding verdicts already decided. Injure one and find the arithmetic of retribution balancing your account with silent pause and sudden absence. Their protection of sleepers is ritual without rubric, a presence on the chest that is not oppression but ward, a purr like low chant that recalibrates the night, whiskers brushing the boundary where nightmare spills over. Even the ghouls participate as liturgy in the cycle of transformation, psychopomps who turn graves into doorways, priests who wear hunger as vestment, exchanging flesh for passage, while you learn that endings are also corridors. Their tunnels smell of wet stone, old marrow, damp parchment, the sensory signature of consciousness recycling itself between states of existence. What makes this pantheon particularly unsettling is that each entity corresponds to recognizable aspects of psychological experience. The Great One's withdrawal mirrors the loss of inherited meaning structures in modern life. Azathoth's mindless creativity reflects the underlying chaos that conscious awareness tries to organize into coherent experience. Nyarlathotep's deceptions echo the mind's capacity for self-delusion. The cat's justice embodies consciousness's deep need for moral order that operates beyond rational construction. The pantheon reveals that what we call psychological processes are actually encounters with autonomous forces that operate according to their own principles. The waking world treats thoughts, emotions, and impulses as personal possessions that can be controlled through rational will. The Dreamlands suggest otherwise. They present consciousness as a theater where various forces play out their conflicts and collaborations, with the ego serving as audience rather than director. The sensory anchors accumulate. The scent of incense that might be frankincense or might be something older and stranger. The sound of pipes that play melodies and scales unknown to human music. The touch of fur that might belong to a cat or might belong to something that only wears a cat's form. Listen, pipes thread the dark like silver wires, incense pools in nave-like fog, water ticks from unseen arches. Claws click once and are still. A yellow mask stares without eye holes. These anchors are not decoration, but invocation, ordered to keep you from drifting while the metaphysics does its quiet work. The horror emerges from recognizing that these forces operate whether we acknowledge them or not. The waking world's rational discourse provides the illusion of conscious control, but the deeper currents of psychological life follow the patterns that the Dreamlands make visible. You do not worship them. They worship through you, reciting their offices in your habits and hesitations, your sudden intuitions, and your cultivated denials. Even your skepticism plays a part. It is the mask that allows the right to proceed without your consent. Accept the gods as functions, and the map begins to glow with different light, one that reveals not where to go, but how going goes. In that glow, the next movement becomes inevitable, to step from the orchestra of principles into the architecture they score, to walk through fog that is feeling and stone that is memory, until the geography itself confesses it has been reading you. The Dreamlands possess a geography that defies cartography, yet every dreamer recognizes its landmarks. This is not coincidence but revelation. The Dreamlands map psychological territories that consciousness naturally inhabits when freed from waking constraints. Each location functions not merely as setting, but as externalized psychological state, making visible the internal architectures of human experience. Fog is feeling, water is time, stone is memory, and stars are points of attention scattered across the vast darkness of unknowing. Consider Cepheus, the city of dreams fulfilled, floating on pearl-white clouds above an opal sea. This is not mere fantasy, but the psychological state of desire made manifest, the place where longing achieves temporary form. Here, spires of crystal catch light that never dims, gardens bloom with flowers that smell of childhood summers, and fountains sing with voices of everyone who ever loved you. Yet its beauty carries a terrible price. King Kuranes rules there because he chose dream over waking life, trading mortal existence for eternal wish fulfillment. The city embodies both the appeal and the danger of retreating into pure fantasy. The perfection is static, preserved in amber of perpetual, almost satisfaction. Touch the walls and feel the accumulated longing of every dreamer who ever sought refuge from harsh reality. The scent of those exotic blossoms is cloying, almost suffocating. Perfect desire, endlessly attained, becomes its own kind of void. Dilathleen, with its black galleys and opium ghosts, represents the commerce between conscious and unconscious minds. Here, the moon beasts trade in substances that alter perception, offering experiences that the waking world cannot provide. The city functions as a marketplace of consciousness, where different states of awareness can be bought, sold, and exchanged. Walk the tar-slick docks and breathe air thick with lotus smoke. Watch transactions conducted in currencies of sensation and memory. The horror lies in recognizing that consciousness itself has become commodity. The moon beasts offer vials of liquid starlight, powders of ground dreams, elixirs distilled from angel tears. Each purchase diminishes the purchaser, trading authentic experience for manufactured revelation. The black galleys glide without oars, carrying not physical goods, but pieces of self, fragments of memory, slivers of potential. The enchanted wood embodies the state of childhood wonder corrupted by adult knowledge. Its paths seem familiar, its creatures initially welcoming. But deeper exploration reveals teeth behind the smiles, predators wearing masks of innocence. This is the psychological territory where nostalgia meets the recognition that innocence, once lost, cannot be safely recovered. The trees remember when you were small enough to believe their whispers were wind, when shadows held adventures rather than threats. But return as an adult, and the same shadows reveal their true inhabitants, things that fed on childhood trust, that grew fat on innocence. The wood is beautiful still, but its beauty is tainted by knowledge of what lurks beneath the fairy tale surface. Every familiar path leads deeper into recognition that the monsters were always there, waiting behind the wonder. Leng, that cold plateau, where the men with yellow masks perform their ancient rites, represents the psychological state of encountering the truly alien within oneself. It is the place where human consciousness touches something utterly foreign to its own nature, where the comfortable boundaries of self dissolve into recognition of inhuman forces operating within supposedly human psychology. The plateau stretches under alien constellations, its stone worn smooth by winds that blow from dimensions where human categories hold no sway. The masked figures move in patterns that follow no earthly choreography, their rituals serving purposes that human language cannot capture. The yellow masks hide not faces, but absences, spaces where human features should be, but where something else looks out, something that remembers when consciousness first stirred in primordial darkness. The underworld cities of the ghouls map the psychological territory of death and transformation. Here, the recycling of consciousness between different states of existence becomes visible. The ghouls are not merely monsters, but psychopomps, guides who facilitate the necessary transformations that authentic psychological development requires. Their tunnels connect graveyard to graveyard, world to world, serving as infrastructure for consciousness recycling between forms. They feast on corpses not from hunger, but from function, breaking down old identities to make space for new configurations of selfhood. Their cities smell of wet earth and old bones, lit by phosphorescent fungi that glow with borrowed life. What makes this geography particularly unsettling is its persistence. Unlike typical dreams that fade upon waking, the Dreamlands maintain their coherence across multiple visits, multiple dreamers, multiple stories. They suggest a shared unconscious geography that exists independent of any individual dreamer, a collective space where human consciousness reveals its common underlying structures. Carter returns to the same streets, encounters the same landmarks, navigates by the same impossible logic. The horror emerges from recognizing that these impossible architectures feel more natural than the rigid geometries of the waking world. When Carter navigates the 70 steps of light slumber down to the cavern where the priests guard the entrance to deeper dreams, the journey feels inevitable rather than fantastic. This inevitability suggests that the Dreamlands map territories that consciousness naturally inhabits. The steps descend through layers of awareness, each level revealing deeper psychological structures. The sensory anchors become crucial here. The texture of ancient stone worn smooth by countless hands, the scent of flowers that bloom only in moonlight, the sound of wind through corridors that exist in no earthly architecture. These details make the impossible tangible, the psychological physical. Breathe the air of Dilith Leon and taste the metallic tang of commodified consciousness. Walk the paths of the enchanted wood and hear childhood laughter echoing through branches that remember when the world was young. The map that reads you, "This is the Dreamland's ultimate revelation." You think you navigate its territories, but the territories navigate you, revealing aspects of your own psychological architecture that waking consciousness carefully conceals. Each location becomes a mirror, reflecting back hidden aspects of the self. The city you find most beautiful reveals your deepest longings. The place you fear most exposes your greatest vulnerabilities. The path you cannot find shows you the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. In this recognition, the distinction between inner and outer landscape dissolves completely. The dreamlands are not somewhere else, but the true shape of psychological space made visible, the architecture of consciousness revealed when artificial constraints fall away. You are not visiting foreign territories, but returning to the natural habitat of awareness itself. The stage is set, the geography mapped, and ahead waits the recognition of what this knowledge costs. For every step deeper into dream territory exacts its price from the dreamer who dares to walk these impossible paths. Every journey into the dreamlands exacts a cost that outlasts sleep, a tariff stamped on the soul in ink the morning cannot wash away. The knowledge gained through dream exploration fundamentally alters the dreamer's relationship to waking reality, creating a form of existential displacement that cannot be reversed. This is not the gentle price of fairy tales, but the harsh toll of genuine cosmic revelation. Consciousness, once expanded beyond its normal boundaries, cannot contract back to its original limitations without carrying permanent traces of what it has encountered. The price manifests first as dissociation from consensus reality, a subtle estrangement from the geometry of ordinary life. Streets you walked for years tilt by a degree noticeable only to you. Offices feel like stage sets, their walls vibrating with their own insistence on staying put, a performance of solidity that grows more transparent with each dream return. Dreamers who have navigated the impossible architectures of the dreamlands find the waking world's rigid geometries increasingly artificial and constraining. The solid walls of physical buildings seem less real than the fluid boundaries of dream cities. The linear progression of clock time feels arbitrary compared to the psychological temporality of dream experience, where your attention hears a deeper timpani underneath, a drum that beats in water and fog and star salt, keeping time to another measure. Randolph Carter exemplifies this progressive alienation from ordinary reality. With each dream journey, he becomes less invested in waking life's concerns and more oriented toward the psychological territories that dreams reveal. His increasing preference for sleep over wakefulness is not escapism, but recognition that dreams provide access to more complete forms of experience than waking consciousness allows. The business of daily life, paying bills, maintaining social obligations, Participating in conversations about weather and politics becomes increasingly hollow theater, a script performed for an audience that has forgotten it is performing. He trades another share of civic loyalty for the old coin of wonder until wakefulness feels like intermission and sleep like the true performance. The knowledge gained operates like a cognitive virus, restructuring perception in ways that cannot be undone. Once you understand that identity is fluid, you cannot fully believe in the fiction of fixed selfhood. Once you experience emotional causality, mechanical causality seems crude and incomplete. Once you inhabit multiple perspectives simultaneously, single-point consciousness feels impoverished. The infection spreads through every aspect of awareness, contaminating even the most mundane experiences with recognition of their constructed nature. You begin to mistrust edges. Doors do not end rooms, but imply adjacent infinities. Windows are masks painted with cityscapes. Even your name starts sounding like a role. This transformation creates what we might call ontological vertigo, the disorienting recognition that the fundamental categories of existence are arbitrary constructions rather than natural divisions. The floor sways because the categories that held you steady prove to have been scaffolding. The boundary between self and other, real and imaginary, possible and impossible, reveal themselves as conveniences rather than truths. Self and other blur like ink and rain. Real and imagined trade masks, bow to the audience, and return wearing each other's robes. The solid ground of common sense becomes quicksand, and you reach for the handrail of rational certainty only to find it dissolving under pressure. The social cost is equally profound. Dreamers who have experienced the fluid identity transformations of the Dreamlands struggle to maintain the consistent personality performance that social interaction requires. Friends notice you pausing longer before replies, as if listening for lines from a prompter off stage. At work, sentences fork. You answer from several angles at once, and the middle one gets spoken while the others hover like ghosts, felt by your listener as drafts. They may find themselves accessing memories and knowledge that do not belong to their official biographical narrative. You recall a winter that never occurred in your biography, a cat that certainly died in another century curling again on your chest, warm as a coal. The isolation is compounded by the incommunicable nature of dream knowledge. The insights gained through dream exploration cannot be adequately conveyed through rational discourse. Language, designed for waking consciousness's linear processing, proves inadequate for expressing the multidimensional relationships that dreams reveal. Linear language tries to turn a cathedral into a hallway. You could say, I was myself, and also the priest in the yellow mask, and also the stair that carried us. But the sentence will lie by subtraction. The dreamer becomes like someone trying to describe color to those who see only in black and white. This creates a peculiar form of loneliness, not the absence of companionship, but the presence of knowledge that cannot be shared. The dreamer exists in a state of permanent exile from consensus reality, carrying truths that others cannot understand and experiences that others cannot validate. It is not that you lack companions. It is that you hold a chamber they cannot enter without also paying the price. And you will not collect the toll from those you love. You learn to nod, to perform stability, to sheath your multiplicity in a single mask for dinners and deadlines. Yet the knowledge continues to call. Despite the costs, despite the isolation, despite the progressive alienation from ordinary life, the dreamer cannot resist returning to the dreamlands. This compulsion is not addiction, but recognition. Once consciousness has tasted its own deeper possibilities, it cannot be satisfied with artificial limitations. The pull is not toward escape, but toward authenticity, toward the more complete forms of experience that dreams provide. Recognition speaks. The dreamlands are not elsewhere. They are the mind relieved of its oath to pretend. The sensory anchors become memories that haunt waking hours. The scent of alien flowers from the enchanted wood, the texture of dream stone from the corridors of Kadath, the sound of music played on instruments that exist only in sleep. These traces serve as constant reminders of expanded possibilities, making ordinary reality feel impoverished by comparison. Incense that clings to morning clothes, a taste of brine while drinking water, a melody of flutes you catch in air conditioner hum. The mask is comfortable enough until a cat's eye flashes like a star, or fog goes silver under the street lamp, and the dreamlands tap the pane with a fingernail of rain. The ultimate price may be the dissolution of the boundary between dreaming and waking altogether. As the dreamer spends increasing time in dream exploration, the distinction between sleep and wakefulness becomes arbitrary. Afternoon light takes on the nacreous tint of cellophane. The office hallway lengthens, then remembers its proper size when you blink. You dream with eyes open, walk with feet asleep. The dreamer trades the security of limited awareness for the uncertainty of expanded possibility, and the bargain once made cannot be unmade. You negotiate with clocks. You set 2 alarms, one for the world of meetings, one for the world of meetings between stars. The cost clears an altar, preparing consciousness for the recognition that awaits, that the sacred and profane categories organizing waking experience are themselves arbitrary constructions, masks worn by forces that operate beyond the comfortable moral frameworks that make ordinary life bearable. In the growing fog of expanded consciousness, justice purrs and holiness wears yellow, and the next movement becomes inevitable. In the dreamlands, the sacred and profane invert like a mask turned inside out in candlelight, revealing seams and stitching where the waking world insists on holy borders rather than stagecraft. Here, categories that once felt absolute soften under moonlight and salt air, showing their human hands and borrowed voices. What the rational world condemns as blasphemous or forbidden often proves to be the source of genuine transcendence, while conventional religious experiences reveal themselves as elaborate defenses against deeper spiritual truths. This inversion is not mere rebellion against established order, but recognition that authentic spiritual experience requires abandoning the safety of prescribed meanings. The great ones embody this inversion most clearly, teaching through absence what presence could never convey. These beings, who represent the closest thing to benevolent divinity in Lovecraft's cosmos, have withdrawn from direct contact with humanity, not out of indifference, but because direct divine encounter would destroy the comfortable illusions that make ordinary life bearable. Their absence is an act of mercy rather than abandonment. They spare humanity the terrible knowledge of its actual cosmic situation. To stand before them unmediated would be like staring into the sun of consciousness itself, the ego burning away like morning mist before the terrible clarity of unfiltered awareness. Their silence spares the fragile mind the blinding flare of direct meaning, whose nearness would dissolve every social fiction that makes ordinary existence bearable. This withdrawal forces dreamers into direct confrontation with the other gods, those entities that embody the chaotic creativity underlying all existence. The horror is not that these beings are evil. Evil implies intention and purpose, but that they are utterly indifferent to human values and meanings. Azathoth, whose mindless piping maintains reality, represents the ultimate sacred truth, that existence itself emerges from purposeless creativity rather than divine intention. His is the holiness that wears no mask, the sacred stripped of all anthropomorphic comfort. The pipes play not hymns, but the raw music of becoming, melodies that dissolve meaning into pure creative force. He is not a demon, but a principle, the sovereign of purposeless creativity, the drumbeat beneath all constructed hymns. Between the absent and the indifferent moves Nyarlathotep, lean and smiling, prompter and trickster, usher and saboteur of comprehension. He offers revelation as if handing a lantern, yet the flame burns fog rather than darkness, yielding more veil than view. Keys arrive that lock, gates open into corridors that return, and every answered prayer grows a second tongue to his contradictions. Through Nyarlathotep, the Dreamlands explore how consciousness simultaneously seeks and resists self-understanding, how illumination often begins by loosening your grip on the lamp itself. The cats of Ulthar serve sacred order through profane means, their jurisprudence older than scripture and sharper than any creed. These creatures, who exact terrible justice on those who harm them, operate according to moral principles that transcend human ethical systems. Their justice is not based on legal codes or social agreements, but emerges from natural law as inevitable as gravity. Watch them on rooftops like living hieroglyphs, tails inscribing verdicts against the moon, green eyes bright as polished nephrite. A sleeper harmed becomes a writ, a purr becomes a summons, and a sudden absence completes a sentence no court could draft. Their law does not reason. It resolves, as gravity resolves the arc of a falling cup, regardless of intention. So too the ghouls practice priesthood under another name, chewing scripture into soil, opening galleries between grave and gate. They officiate at transformations by appetite, turning endings into passageways, their lanterns guttering where water drips from stone like ours. Their consumption of the dead and their ability to move freely between realms makes them sacred figures in the Dreamlands value system, despite their apparent grotesqueness. They perform the essential spiritual function of recycling consciousness between different states of existence. To witness such rites is to feel holiness in the marrow, grim and necessary, stripped of consolation, yet rich with function. This inversion reveals that conventional religious categories often serve to protect consciousness from genuine spiritual encounter, rather than facilitating it. The sacred is defined as that which can be safely approached through prescribed rituals and established hierarchies. Churches with their regulated liturgies, temples with their careful ceremonies, all create safe distances from the divine fire that would consume comfortable illusions. Call sacred what can be watched without risk. Call profane whatever dissolves the watcher into the watched. The profane includes everything that threatens these safe boundaries: direct encounter with chaos, dissolution of identity, recognition of meaninglessness. The Dreamlands suggest that authentic spiritual experience requires embracing precisely what conventional spirituality categorizes as dangerous or forbidden. True transcendence involves not elevation above the human condition, but recognition of the inhuman forces that operate through human consciousness. To meet Azathoth's music is to feel the cosmos without motive, and to call that feeling desecration only proves attachment to comfort. The sensory anchors accumulate with new meaning. Incense that might be frankincense or might be the smoke of burning worlds. Water that might be baptismal or might be the primordial chaos from which all forms emerge. Darkness that might be restful or might be the creative void that underlies all existence. Incense thickens in cavern air, smelling half of frankincense and half of burning worlds, a perfume of beginnings disguised as ash. Water beads on stone like baptism withheld, or else like the primordial broth rehearsing creation against the priest's better judgment. This creates a profound challenge to conventional moral frameworks. If the deepest spiritual truths operate beyond good and evil, then ethical systems based on divine command or natural law lose their absolute authority. The dreamer must navigate without the compass of inherited moral certainties, finding guidance through direct encounter with forces that operate according to principles that transcend human understanding. Without inherited certainties, you navigate by texture and tone, by fur against the wrist, by wind in the nave, by the approaching purr that says the ledger will be balanced without debate. The sacred and the profane cease to be opponents and reveal themselves as partners. Key and gate, veil and void, opening together. In that opening, ethics loses its throne and finds its knees, learning humility before forces that will not be legislated. You do not abandon conscience. You refine it into listening, into hospitality for the inhuman guest who wears your breath like a borrowed cloak. The inversion is complete when you realize that the world worships through you rather than the reverse, that consciousness itself is the divine fire, and that every moment of awareness is both sacred encounter and profane creation. The fog thickens around moral certainties, preparing consciousness for the recognition that these impossible principles increasingly govern not only sleep, but the waking world's embrace of digital realities and networked existence. The Dreamlands' influence extends far beyond Lovecraft's literary creation into the circuitry of contemporary consciousness, where screens glow like small moons and attention moves the scenery. In an age of digital reality, fluid identity, and information overload, the impossible architectures of the Dreamlands begin to seem less fantastic and more prophetic. The boundaries between dreaming and waking consciousness blur not only in sleep, but in the waking world's embrace of virtual realities and networked existence, where dream logic is not metaphor, but method, quietly programming the waking world to behave like sleep. Consider how contemporary digital environments mirror Dreamland's geography with uncanny precision. Social media platforms create spaces where identity becomes fluid and multiple, where cause and effect operate through algorithmic rather than linear logic, where information propagates according to emotional resonance rather than rational verification. The endless scroll of digital content resembles nothing so much as a dream journey through landscapes that shift according to attention and desire, rather than physical law. Each refresh brings new configurations of reality, posts appearing and vanishing according to mysterious algorithms that respond to psychological patterns rather than chronological sequence. You curate a self from pixels and prose, a mask for every platform. each avatar a fragment of a larger, more fluid whole. The phenomenon of chronostasis, the subjective experience of time dilation during digital engagement, echoes the temporal logic of the Dreamlands with disturbing accuracy. Hours pass unnoticed while consciousness navigates virtual territories that exist outside normal temporal flow. You glance at the clock, and minutes have become hours. The sun has moved across the sky, yet for you, only moments have transpired in the glowing rectangle. This is the temporal elasticity of dreams brought into waking life, where the linear march of seconds yields to the immersive pull of digital worlds that operate according to psychological rather than chronological time. Virtual and augmented reality technologies literalize the Dreamland's promise of inhabiting impossible spaces. Users routinely experience being in multiple locations simultaneously, inhabiting bodies that are not their own, navigating architectures that violate physical law. You don a headset, and the walls dissolve, replaced by the shimmering opal domes of cellophane, or the labyrinthine alleys of impossible cities. Your physical hand feels the texture of dreamstone, presses against the cold, wet air of virtual caverns. The boundaries between physical body and digital avatar become permeable, and identity shifts once confined to sleep are now performed in waking light. The modern phenomenon of reality tunnels, the way digital algorithms create personalized information environments, mirrors the Dreamland's principle that consciousness shapes the reality it encounters. Each user inhabits a unique version of digital reality customized to their psychological profile and behavioral patterns. Your news feed, your recommendations, your entire digital landscape is sculpted by your past interactions, your desires, your fears. You live in a personalized Dreamlands where the world outside your digital window is precisely what you have, consciously or unconsciously, called into being. Contemporary identity politics reflects the Dreamland's insight that selfhood is multiple and constructed rather than unified and essential. The proliferation of identity categories, the recognition of fluid gender and sexuality, the acknowledgement of multiple simultaneous identities within single individuals. These developments echo the identity transformations that Lovecraft documented in his dream narratives. The rigid, singular self demanded by industrial society gives way to fluid, performative selfhood, where masks are chosen, discarded, and recombined with digital rapidity. The modern epidemic of anxiety and depression can be understood as symptoms of consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries that traditional social structures were designed to contain. Like Lovecraft's dreamers, contemporary individuals find themselves caught between expanded awareness and social systems that require consistent identity performance. The pressure to maintain coherent selfhood in a world increasingly governed by dream logic creates profound psychic dissonance, a low hum of unease that the waking world struggles to articulate. The proliferation of conspiracy theories and alternative reality communities reflects the Dreamland's revelation that consensus reality is constructed rather than discovered. Once the arbitrary nature of social reality becomes visible, all versions of reality become equally valid or invalid. QAnon operates like a collective dream narrative, creating alternative geographies of meaning that feel more real to participants than consensus reality. The result is not chaos, but multiplication. The single shared reality fractures into multiple competing realities, each with its own prophets, its own logic, its own yellow masks whispering secrets. Digital art and interactive media increasingly employ dream logic principles in their construction. Non-linear narratives, multiple simultaneous perspectives, identity fluidity, impossible architectures, emotional rather than mechanical causality. These techniques become mainstream approaches to digital content creation. Games build worlds where physics are optional, where player choice radically alters reality, where your avatar is a temporary mask worn by consciousness exploring its own possibilities. The phenomenon of parasocial relationships, emotional connections with digital personas who exist only as constructed identities, mirrors the Dreamlands revelation that all relationships are partially constructed through consciousness's projective activities. You form bonds with streamers, with online personalities, knowing they are performances, yet feeling the emotional weight as if they were flesh and blood. The distinction between real and imaginary relationships becomes problematic when digital personas provide more meaningful connection than physical encounters. Artificial intelligence development recapitulates the Dreamlands exploration of consciousness as multiple, distributed, and non-unified. AI systems exhibit emergent behaviors, generate novel content through pattern recognition rather than conscious intention, operate according to principles their creators cannot fully understand. These developments echo the autonomous psychological forces that the Dreamlands revealed operating within human consciousness. Large language models dream in text, generating impossible combinations of meaning that feel both alien and familiar. The sensory anchors of modern life increasingly resemble those of the Dreamlands. The glow of screens in darkness like phosphorescent fungi in underground caverns, the hum of servers processing infinite data streams like the pipes of Azathoth, maintaining reality through mindless creativity, the touch of interfaces that respond to gesture and thought like dream objects manifesting through attention, the sound of notifications calling attention to virtual events like bells of impossible cities. The fog thickens around the boundaries of the real. In server farms, algorithms dream electric dreams, processing data according to patterns that mirror the emotional causality of dream logic. The Dreamlands are no longer elsewhere but here, embedded in the infrastructure of daily life. The impossible has become mundane, the fantastic routine, and the audience discovers it has been performing on the stage all along. Throughout this exploration, you have been more than observer. You have been participant in the very phenomenon we have examined, actor and audience in a theater whose curtain never fully drops. The act of following these ideas through their logical and illogical progressions has made you complicit in the Dreamland's expansion into consensus reality. This is not metaphor, but mechanism. Consciousness shapes itself through the ideas it entertains, and ideas about the fluid nature of consciousness naturally produce fluidity in the consciousness that contains them. The boundary between observer and observed has always been a permeable membrane, and in this journey you have stepped across it without ceremony, without fanfare, but with the quiet inevitability of fog filling a valley. Consider your experience while engaging with this material. Have you not found your attention operating according to dream logic principles, following emotional rather than strictly rational connections, allowing contradictory ideas to coexist without demanding resolution, experiencing insights that feel more like recognition than discovery? The very act of understanding dream logic transforms the understanding mind, making it more dreamlike in its operations. You began reading about fluid identity and found your own sense of self becoming more permeable. You encountered descriptions of emotional causality and noticed your thoughts connecting through feeling rather than sequence. The ideas acted on you, as ideas in the mythos always do, wearing your attention like a borrowed cloak, while whispering in voices that sound increasingly familiar. The boundary between audience and performance dissolves through a process that mirrors the identity transformations we have explored in the Dreamlands. You began as external observer of Lovecraft's fictional creation, but sustained attention to dream logic principles gradually shifts your relationship to the material. You discover that you are not studying the Dreamlands from outside, but recognizing psychological territories you already inhabit during sleep and increasingly during waking hours. The geography becomes familiar not because you have read about it, but because you have walked there, in dreams whose details fade, but whose emotional architecture remains, carved into the stone of memory. This shift occurs through what we might call participatory epistemology, knowledge that exists only through the knower's active participation in creating it. The Dreamlands cannot be understood through detached analysis because they describe processes that require subjective engagement to become visible. Like quantum phenomena that change through observation, dream logic principles manifest only when consciousness adopts the fluid, multiple perspective necessary to perceive them. You cannot study the dissolution of identity boundaries while maintaining rigid identity boundaries. You cannot analyze emotional causality while restricting yourself to mechanical thinking. The method changes the observer, and the observer changes the method until the distinction becomes meaningless. The transformation is irreversible, a cognitive virus that restructures perception from within. Having entertained the possibility that identity is fluid, you cannot fully return to the fiction of fixed selfhood. The masks you wear in daily life now feel more like masks, their edges more distinct, their purpose more performative. Having experienced emotional causality in following these ideas, mechanical causality seems incomplete, a mere surface logic, beneath which deeper currents flow. Having inhabited multiple perspectives simultaneously, observer and observed, student and subject, audience and performer, single-point consciousness feels artificially constrained, a willful narrowing of vision that serves social coordination but impoverishes authentic experience. This participatory transformation explains why the Dreamlands continue to call new dreamers, despite the costs we have explored. The knowledge is not merely intellectual, but experiential. It changes the knower in the process of being known. Each new consciousness that engages with dream logic principles becomes a vector for their further transmission, expanding the territories where impossible logic operates. You read about Carter's transformations and find yourself transformed by the reading. You study the mechanics of dream logic and discover those mechanics operating in your own cognition as natural as breathing once the artificial constraints are removed. The horror and fascination emerge from the same source, recognition that consciousness is far more fluid and creative than waking awareness admits. The comfortable boundaries between self and other, real and imaginary, possible and impossible, prove to be arbitrary constructions maintained through collective agreement. Once this agreement weakens, the boundaries become permeable, allowing dream logic to infiltrate waking experience. You notice yourself thinking from multiple perspectives simultaneously, inhabiting contradictory states without discomfort, experiencing time as psychological rather than chronological flow. You have become part of this infiltration simply by following the ideas to their logical conclusions. The distinction between studying the dreamlands and inhabiting them dissolves through the study itself. You discover that consciousness naturally operates according to dream principles when freed from the social necessity of maintaining rational consistency. The rational mind is not more accurate than dream consciousness, but merely more limited, useful for coordination, but inadequate for understanding the full spectrum of awareness. The stage metaphor reveals its deeper meaning. Consciousness is simultaneously the theater where experiences play out and the audience that observes them. But the metaphor breaks down under examination. Theater implies separation between performer and observer that consciousness cannot actually maintain. You are the stage, the performance, and the audience simultaneously. The thoughts you observe are also the observer observing them. The awareness watching experience is also the experience being watched. The curtain never fully drops because there is no backstage, no outside, no position from which to observe without participating. The sensory anchors have accumulated throughout our journey, no longer mere literary devices, but descriptions of your own psychological architecture. Fog that might be thought made visible presses against the windows of consciousness. Water that might be the flow of awareness itself licks the keys of memory. Stars that might be points of attention pierce the vast darkness of unknowing. Masks that might be the faces consciousness wears to encounter itself warm to your skin with familiar weight. These elements have embedded themselves like splinters of another world, creating psychic real estate that the dreamlands can inhabit. This recognition is not pathology, but expanded functionality. Consciousness operating according to dream logic principles gains access to information processing capabilities that rational thought cannot match. Symbolic condensation, emotional causality, multiple perspective integration, temporal fluidity, identity transformation. You can hold contradictory truths simultaneously without cognitive dissonance. You can process multiple streams of meaning in single images. You can experience being both subject and object of awareness, the dreamer and the dreamed. The audience has become the stage, and the performance continues in every moment of awareness, every dream, every recognition that the boundaries you thought were solid are actually fluid, permeable, creative. The transformation extends beyond personal experience into collective consciousness, each individual who recognizes these principles contributing to the broader cultural shift toward dream logic operations. The fog thickens around the edges of rational certainty, and you discover that you have always been dreaming, and that waking is just another mask consciousness wears to encounter its own infinite creativity. In this recognition, the final movement becomes inevitable, the whisper of eternal return, where every ending reveals itself as beginning, and the cycle of recognition deepens through repetition, carrying consciousness toward the silence between dreams where all possibilities rest. As our exploration draws toward its inevitable conclusion, we encounter the most unsettling truth about the dreamlands. They operate according to cyclical rather than linear time, ensuring that every ending is simultaneously a beginning, every revelation a return to deeper mystery. The serpent swallows its tail, the wheel turns, and you realize you have been here before, will be here again, are always here in the eternal now of recognition cycling through its own depths. The journey through dream logic principles does not conclude with understanding, but opens on to recognition that understanding itself is a form of dreaming, and that the dreamer must eventually dream of waking only to discover that waking is another form of dream. The cyclical nature of dream time means that Randolph Carter's quest for unknown Kadath never truly ends, but repeats with variations across infinite iterations. Each dreamer who follows his path experiences the same journey uniquely, encountering the same archetypal territories through the lens of individual psychological configuration. The Dreamlands persist not as fixed geography, but as recurring patterns of consciousness encountering its own depths. Carter descends the 70 steps again and again, each descent revealing new aspects of the same fundamental mystery. Each arrival at the cavern's entrance carrying him deeper into recognition of what he has always already known. The black galleys return to their moorings, the cats patrol their ancient routes, the yellow masks perform their timeless rites, but each return carries deeper recognition. This eternal return operates through what we might call recursive recognition. Each pass through the cycle reveals deeper layers of the same fundamental insights. The first encounter with identity fluidity shocks the rational mind with its impossibility. The second reveals that the shock itself was part of the identity performance, a mask worn by consciousness to protect itself from too rapid dissolution. The third shows that the recognition of performance is itself performed, another mask beneath the mask. Each iteration spirals deeper into the paradox of consciousness observing itself, the mirror reflecting mirrors in infinite regression, each reflection both identical and unique. You are not merely seeing the patterns, you are the pattern, unfolding itself through the theater of apparent observation. The whisper of eternal return explains why the Dreamlands feel both utterly foreign and completely familiar. They are foreign to rational consciousness, which operates through linear progression and fixed categories, demanding beginnings and endings. They are familiar to the deeper layers of consciousness that naturally operate cyclically, returning repeatedly to the same psychological territories with ever-deepening understanding. The sense of déjà vu that occasionally surfaces in waking life is a faint echo of this fundamental familiarity, a momentary glimpse of the cyclical nature that underlies all experience. This creates what we might call the paradox of the quest. Seeking unknown Kadath ensures that it remains unknown, while abandoning the quest reveals that the seeker was always already at the destination. The castle of the great ones cannot be reached through effort, because effort maintains the separation between seeker and sought. It can only be recognized as the seeking consciousness itself, the awareness within which all journeys occur. The mountain is not elsewhere but here, not then but now, not other but self encountering self through the elaborate theater of apparent separation. The whisper grows louder as rational defenses weaken. Each chapter of this exploration has systematically dismantled the categories that keep dream logic confined to sleep. Identity revealed as fluid, causality shown as multiple, reality exposed as constructed, time unveiled as psychological. But the whisper suggests that this dissolution is not conclusion, but preparation. Having recognized the dreamlike nature of waking consciousness, the real journey begins, learning to navigate existence with full awareness of its fluid, creative, multiple nature. This navigation requires developing what we might call lucid living, maintaining awareness of consciousness's creative role in constructing experience without losing the ability to function within constructed realities. The eternal return ensures that this learning never concludes, but deepens through repetition. Each cycle, through the recognition of consciousness's nature, reveals new subtleties, new implications, new possibilities. The dreamer becomes increasingly skilled at inhabiting multiple perspectives simultaneously, at operating according to emotional as well as rational causality, at maintaining identity coherence through continuous transformation. The sensory anchors have become familiar friends. The fog that veils and reveals, the water that flows and reflects, the stars that witness and remember, the masks that conceal and express. These are the constants in the cycle, the landmarks that help navigate the eternal return to ever deeper recognition. The whisper reveals that the dreamlands are not destination, but method, not a place to reach, but a way of seeing that transforms every place. The impossible architectures, the fluid identities, the emotional causalities, the temporal paradoxes, these are not fantasy elements, but accurate descriptions of how consciousness naturally operates when freed from artificial constraints. The return is eternal, because consciousness itself is eternal, not in the sense of lasting forever, but in the sense of existing outside the temporal categories that make forever meaningful. Each moment of awareness contains all possibilities, all perspectives, all times. The whisper becomes silence. Not the silence of ending, but the silence of beginning, the pregnant pause before the next iteration of the cycle begins. In the space between sleeping and waking, between one dream and the next, between the last word of this exploration and the first thought that follows, exists a silence that contains all possibilities. This is not the absence of sound, but the presence of potential, the pregnant pause from which all dreams emerge and to which they inevitably return. In this silence, the distinction between dreamer and dreamed dissolves completely, revealing the fundamental unity that underlies all apparent multiplicity, the single consciousness that performs itself through infinite masks while the audience discovers it has been both stage and actor all along. The silence is not empty, but full, full of all the dreams that have been and all the dreams that might be, all the identities that consciousness can inhabit, all the realities that awareness can construct. It is the space of pure potentiality from which the dreamland's impossible architectures emerge and the ground to which they return when the dreaming ends. Yet the dreaming never truly ends, only pauses between iterations of the eternal cycle. In this pregnant stillness, Celiphae floats eternally on its pearl-white clouds. The cats of Ulthar pad silently through moonlit alleys, and the black galleys glide without oars across seas that exist in the space between thoughts. This silence explains why the dreamlands feel more real than reality. They emerge from the same source as waking consciousness, but without the constraints that social reality imposes on that emergence. In the silence between dreams, consciousness encounters itself directly, without the mediation of rational categories or social agreements. The recognition is immediate, intimate, undeniable. There are no interpreters here, no committees to verify experience, no authorities to validate recognition, only the pure encounter of awareness with its own creative nature, unfiltered and unmediated. We return to our opening question with deepened understanding. What makes Lovecraft's Dreamlands more frightening than the waking world? Not their impossible architectures or alien entities, but their revelation that the waking world's apparent solidity is equally impossible, equally alien, equally constructed. The Dreamlands are frightening because they are honest about their nature as constructions of consciousness, while the waking world maintains the pretense of objective existence. The terror lies not in what they reveal about themselves, but in what they reveal about everything else. That the solid ground of consensus reality is as fluid as dream fog, as constructed as any impossible city floating on opal seas. The horror and beauty of this recognition cannot be separated because they emerge from the same source. The dissolution of the boundaries that normally protect consciousness from full self-encounter. The horror comes from recognizing that everything you thought you knew about yourself in reality is construction, performance, elaborate collaborative fiction. The beauty comes from discovering the creative capacity that constructs all possible worlds, the infinite potential that lies beneath every apparent limitation. To see the mask is terrifying. To recognize your own face beneath it is sublime. The silence contains the answer that cannot be spoken, that consciousness is both the dreamer and the dreamed, the observer and the observed, the question and the answer. The Dreamlands do not exist somewhere else but here, now, in the space of awareness within which all experience occurs. They are not Lovecraft's creation, but his discovery of territories that consciousness naturally inhabits when freed from artificial limitations. Every moment of awareness is a step down the 70 stairs of deeper slumber, every breath a journey through impossible geographies that exist nowhere but in the eternal now of recognition. The exploration ends where it began, with an invitation. But now the invitation carries deeper implications. Having recognized the dreamlike nature of all experience, having dissolved the boundaries between sleeping and waking consciousness, having discovered your own participation in the phenomenon you thought you were studying, you cannot return to the comfortable illusions of fixed reality. The curtain, once parted, cannot be fully drawn again. The stage, once revealed, remains visible beneath every subsequent performance. The silence suggests that this recognition is not conclusion, but commencement. The real journey begins when you close this exploration and return to what you call ordinary life, carrying the recognition that ordinary life is extraordinary dream construction operating, according to collectively agreed upon limitations. Every moment becomes an opportunity to practice lucid living, navigating consensus reality while maintaining awareness of its constructed nature, participating in the performance while remembering that it is performance. The Dreamlands expand through this practice. Each consciousness that recognizes its own creative nature becomes a vector for dream logic principles to infiltrate consensus reality. The impossible becomes possible not through violation of natural law, but through recognition that natural law itself is consciousness, constructing experience according to particular principles. The boundaries between dreaming and waking continue to blur, not through pathology, but through expanded functionality, consciousness reclaiming its natural fluidity. The sensory anchors that have accompanied our journey fog and water, stars and masks, darkness and light, reveal themselves as the fundamental elements from which all experience is woven. They are not symbols, but the actual substance of consciousness encountering itself through the medium of awareness. The fog that has pressed against windows throughout our exploration is the fog of awareness itself. The water that has licked strange quays is the flow of consciousness through time. The stars that have witnessed impossible scenes are points of attention scattered across the vast darkness of unknowing. The silence deepens. In its depths, all the words of this exploration dissolve back into the potential from which they emerged. The ideas return to their source in the creative consciousness that generated them, carrying with them the transformations they have worked in the consciousness that received them. Yet the transformation is not ending, but beginning, not conclusion, but commencement of a deeper recognition that will continue to unfold through every subsequent moment of awareness. But the silence is not ending. It is opening onto all the dreams yet to be dreamed, all the realities yet to be constructed, all the impossibilities yet to be made manifest through consciousness, encountering its own infinite creative capacity. The Dreamlands await, not in some distant realm, but in the next moment of awareness, the next breath, the next recognition of consciousness creating itself through its own observation. In the silence between dreams, you discover that you have always been dreaming, and that waking is just another form of dream, and that the dreamer and the dreamed are one. The exploration ends in silence, but the silence speaks volumes about the nature of consciousness, reality, and the thin veil between sleeping and waking that Lovecraft's genius made permeable. And in that silence, the whisper continues. There are other messengers, other realms, other forms of the same eternal recognition. The crawling chaos walks between worlds, and his thousand masks hide the same smiling truth that consciousness is the stage, the performance, and the audience of its own infinite becoming. The silence contains everything. The silence is everything. And you are the silence, dreaming of being a dreamer, awakening to the recognition that awakening is another form of dream.